Alright, hello everyone, and welcome back to another video. Now this video is going to be on Green Day, the legendary 90s punk band that became eventually one of the biggest bands of all time. You know, and they came out of, much like Blink-182 did a scene like them, where they were like underground, did underground shows in their city. A local venue that was pretty common, which actually got a lot of attention, which is kind of how they got famous actually. And after that, of course, they released a few really successful albums. Dookie and American Idiot were very successful. 21st Century Breakdown, which is one of the later ones, very successful. But the first big album, of course, was Dookie, which had a few of their biggest songs that have ever been released. Basket Case, which I'm sure almost all of you probably know unless you're living under a rock. But that was the song that really made them take off and become successful as a band and get into the mainstream. But this is going to be albums reviewed from worst to best by them from my personal take. Let me know what your guys' lists are in the comments, and yeah, let's get into this. So my least favorite album by Green Day is the most recent one, Father of All, and this is because it didn't sound anything like any of the other albums in my opinion. It sounded kind of bland to me actually. I mean, there's a few songs that are I guess okay, but I mean, I feel like this is pretty much the California of Green Day pretty much. You know, the California album from Blink-182 that wasn't really that much interesting. There's a few good songs from it, sure, but most of it is kind of bland in my opinion compared to a lot of their other material for sure, and I think there's a lot better material that Green Day have released than this. But people today are, you know, finding this album starting to get into the band, you know, whatever, they'll probably listen to other material and think it's better anyway, but this album is my least favorite for that reason. And number 10 is Uno Dos and Tre. This one had a little better songs on it, in my opinion, than Father of All. There was a few actually pretty good songs on these trios. Uno had maybe a chosen few. Dos and Tre were my least favorite by far, though. I'm grouping these into one segment because this was the trio that was released in 2011 that, of course, they released them all at the same time pretty much, almost, and it was a little bit underwhelming actually because it was almost like everything else that you were hearing during the time, though, with a lot of it, like A Kill the DJ, I don't think was their greatest song in my opinion for many reasons. It wasn't really like any of the other material, and trying to go disco and all that is not really Green Day's thing, I don't think, and didn't really fit for them all that well. Yeah, this was better than Father of All, of course, though, for those reasons. It wasn't as generic as Father of All, but still was kind of generic and had a few good songs for sure that really stuck out, like Let Yourself Go, and X-Kid was alright. Yeah, Nuclear Family was alright too, that was one of their singles. It wasn't too bad for sure, but Oh Love wasn't the greatest song they've written in my opinion either. I think that one could have been a lot better for sure, but yeah, that's why Uno Dos and Tre are at number 10 spot. So number 9 is Warning. Now this one was a little better, I think. I do like the song Warning. There's a few other ones I do like on this album. I feel like this, though, was where Green Day really started to experiment more, and not for the worst necessarily either. I think this was just when they were just starting to get the hang of experimenting more, but the next album after this was one of the most massive comebacks I've ever seen. This album was okay, though. It wasn't the greatest album they've made, but it was, you know, about an average Green Day album. I wouldn't say it's the best album they've ever made by any stretch, but there's some, you know, decent songs in this album for sure, like Warning and Waiting and Macy's Day Parade, and those are pretty good songs. I think this album was a bit underrated actually in my opinion for those songs. Of course, those songs were singles and were kind of known by Green Day, but of course they're not their most known songs, and this isn't their most known album. But I think mainly because they're first starting to get used to this new sound they were going for. I don't think they had it in full form yet, but this was just their first attempt at it. It was okay though, it was a decent effort. Of course, they came back with an amazing album after this, which I'll mention later in this video. But number 8 is Revolution Radio. Now this one I think had a few songs really stuck out to me. The opening and closing tracks really stick out to me on this one. They had a few okay singles too. Revolution Radio is a pretty good one, and Bang Bang is by far my favorite single on this album because I think it really goes back to the roots of, you know, punk rock back day kind of, but in a more like polished form, but not necessarily in a bad way. I think actually they did the song very well in that kind of production quality, and it brings back the roots, but also kind of goes towards the future as of the production quality for Green Day, for sure. This album did have some meaningful songs that I can tell they put some emotion into, though, like Ordinary World, and Outlaws is one that really sticks out to me for sure, because, you know, I feel like it could be a real anthem for sure for people that are in this kind of scene. It's not as good as Give Me One Good Reason by Blink-182, though. I think that one's actually better, but this one I think definitely does kind of give a bit of a spark, though, and I think the song is massively underrated and should be known more. I think it should have been a single on the album, because, you know, imagine what that could do for the scene, you know, having this song be a single. That could be a total anthem, you know, which it kind of even is without it being a single, actually. So number 7 is 21st Century Breakdown. Now this one I think was a good album. 21 Guns, you know, when the first time I heard it, pretty good song. I think I got sick of it after a while after hearing it so many times, but I still listen to it every now and then. But there's many other songs in this album that I think are worth mentioning, like 21st Century Breakdown, the title track, and Viva La Gloria, and Restless Heart Syndrome. There's a lot of underrated songs in this album, actually. Of course, 21 Guns was just their one of the most successful singles in a long time. There are many songs in this album that are definitely worth mentioning still, like, you know, Stockholm Syndrome, like I said, and all those. I think this was kind of almost like the same thing they were doing in American Idiot, but not in as anthemic of a form, more of just a variety of kind of things I talk about in this, even more than American Idiot. In fact, this is a pretty long album, actually, which I think that kind of brings it down a little bit, considering the fact that it's so long. It's still a good album, though, I will say. It's a pretty decent album. It's not their worst, but not their greatest either, you know, but I still enjoyed it for what it was. But number 6 is 39 Smooth. Now, this one was actually before Tré Cool was even in the band, believe it or not. He actually did record in their first album, which is 39 Smooth. Was actually their debut album, which had some pretty good songs on it. At the Library's a good one. Going to Pasalaka is another good one. There's many others on this album that are definitely decent songs, and I think are pretty underrated in my opinion. Of course, Tré Cool made the band a little better and gave more to the band for sure as musically. This was just during the old days of Green Day, when they used to go to their local venue a lot to play and see what they could get there. This one was just mainly for the hell of it, you know. They didn't really have all the money to do a really high produced album, really high quality produced album yet, but for what it definitely was a good album, I would say, and definitely is worth mentioning. Number 5 is Nimrod, and this actually does have a variety of songs on it, and I think this album kind of keeps the roots as well, along with going with new things that they were experimenting with, which I think combined pretty well, actually. They're kind of doing an alternative rock kind of thing with some songs, and with songs like Nice Guys Finished Last, of course, just a punk anthem pretty much, an upbeat punk anthem, which I think Nice Guys Finished Last is a great song, by the way, and Uptight is another great song that's really underrated in my opinion. Of course, they have the acoustic song Good Riddance on here as well, which is pretty well known. Of course, this was at many high school graduations and all that, and for good reason. I thought this is actually a good choice for high school graduations, even if it is a little bit overused. But it's a pretty good song, though, I will say, and I think this album is definitely a pretty good album from Green Day. Of course, there's a few that are still better than this, but this definitely has some pretty good anthems in it, like Nice Guys Finished Last and Uptight. There's many great songs in this album musically, and I think they definitely did do some good stuff as a songwriting too in this album, and had a good variety of stuff in this album, and not just really one thing to offer, which I think is a good thing about this album for sure. And if you're for a variety of sound, I think this album is a good album to choose as a Green Day. And number 4 is Kerplunk. This album was actually their second album. This is when Tré Cool first joined the band, and he actually added a lot to this band. This band sounded a bit different than they did for the first album. It was kind of similar, but you know, once Tré Cool joined the band, you could tell that something better was happening for them musically, for sure. Because they actually had a song called 2,000 Light Years Away, which was actually their first single ever, and of course it wasn't their most known single by any means, but this one definitely is a pretty good song. I love the song One for the Razorbacks, and there's a few others that I really enjoy on this album as well. And this album definitely has some good guitar parts in it, and definitely shows that Green Day can be a great band musically, and this really is a great album to skateboard to be honest. Well, I listened to this album quite a bit actually because of that, and you know, in the summertime I skate to this album actually quite a bit, and I definitely recommend it. And if you're looking for like an older kind of 90s punk rock kind of sound, this album is definitely the way to go. I think this one is very underrated as well, and is one of the best albums ever released on Lookout Records actually, along with Operation Ivy's Energy album. Number 3 is Insomniac. Now this one, great album for sure, you know. I can't think of one bad song on this album, honestly, and this kind of was actually after Dookie, which was probably their most successful album of all time, but this album was definitely a pretty decent album. I think they definitely were still doing great songs in this album. Of course, it wasn't as commercially successful as Dookie was, but there were a few pretty successful singles on it, like Walking Contradiction and a few others on this album. This album definitely had some great songs on it though, I'm not gonna lie, and I think this is definitely when Green Day was at their prime, along with a few other albums I'll mention that are actually higher on this list. But this album was definitely when they were at their prime for sure, and it was when they were on a streak of just releasing great album after great album after great album. Of course, Green Day, honestly, it was like taking over the punk rock scene pretty much, along with Blink-182 and a few others that were rising up on the scene like The Offspring. This was overall just the sound that I really enjoyed in Green Day and wish they would kind of go back to a bit, you know. For what it was, you know, it was a great album in my opinion, and almost as good as Dookie was for what it was, you know, and I think this one deserves more appreciation as well for what it was. Number 2 is American Idiot. This album is an absolute masterpiece in my opinion, and an absolute icon for the 2000s. Of course, this album is very well known, but for good reason though, for sure. And pretty much every song on this album, even if they are played quite a bit, still sound great almost everywhere. Boulevard of Broken Dreams is a great song. American Idiot's a pretty good song, and it's pretty relevant even still to this day. And there's even a few slower songs like What's Her Name on this album, which kind of adds more to the album in my opinion. Wake Me Up When September Ends. Those are a couple slower songs in the album, but of course there are many upbeat songs in this album. There's actually a few really long songs in this album, Jesus of Suburbia and Homecoming, which are both great songs. I think are absolute anthems, pretty much. Honestly, this is an album I play quite often, and it's one of my favorite albums of all time by far, for so many reasons. So many relatable songs in this album, like even the most known song, Basket Case, is pretty relatable to me. And Longview's another pretty good song, and there's a bit of humor in it as well. They knew how to be funny, serious at the same time, which I kind of liked about this album for sure. It was funny, but it was also kind of serious in a few ways, but they fit this together so perfectly, because I think not many bands can pull this off pretty well, but Green Day always manages to do it in such a great way that always fits together so well, you know. And this album was just all around just a great album. Like I said, I know I probably said it a few times, but this album deserves that appreciation for sure. And this is one of the greatest albums I think I've heard in that year, honestly, along with Out Come the Wolves. And 1994 was a great year in general for this kind of music, and this was when so many bands like this were at their absolute prime, releasing great albums, releasing albums that honestly deserve the appreciation of being in the charts. Smashed by The Offspring was another one that came out during around this time, which is another absolutely amazing album. This is honestly just a great album, and that's all I'll say about this album. That is a full review for Green Day's discography, and I'll probably be reviewing more in the future if they release more material, but that is just what they've released so far that I'm reviewing. So let me know what your guys' worst to best albums are, Green Day, in the comments, and I'll see you guys in another video.